A while back, I made a promise that when this channel reached 100,000 subscribers, I would make a video on who I consider to be the 100 greatest footballers of all time. So firstly, I must thank every one of you who has subscribed and all of you that continue to watch my videos and don't just keep this channel going, but keep it growing. We'll try not to be too self-congratulatory though, since we've got an awful lot to get through. The closer I got to the 100,000 mark, the quicker I realised that this was a terrible idea. Many of you will know that we previously did a series looking at the 7 greatest players of all time in every position, which culminated in our own all-time 11 and 23-man squad. This was much tougher. We were not just comparing players from different positions, but also different eras. I won't bore you, but it was incredibly tricky, and it is the nature of these things that you will no doubt disagree with some of my selections and omissions. For us, there are 2 main criteria: quality and longevity. Essentially, how good they were and for how long they were that good. That's simplifying things slightly, but that's the basic formula that got us our 100. Right, strap in and get ready, here are our 100 greatest footballers of all time. Graham Souness. When I tell you that the likes of Hristo Stoichkov and Tostão missed out on this list, whilst Graham Souness does not, some of you may think I'm mad. Some of you may even stop watching. Please don't, I'm happy to defend every decision in here. Souness was undoubtedly less glamorous than his peers in this list, but he was just as effective. Arguably the most important player in Liverpool history, Souness typified the late 70s, early 80s era. He was strong, rugged, and dominated the midfield, but he was also a subtle genius, an intelligent reader of the game, and he had a brilliant first touch. Andrea Pirlo. I hate to be terse, but the size of this list requires it. Since Andrea Pirlo is a player most of you will know well, we won't gloss on this one for too long. Pirlo was a world-class playmaker who played the game at his own tempo, and his performances were at a very high level for more than a decade and a half. Nils Lidholm. 1/3 of the Greno League partnership of both Sweden and AC Milan, Nils Lidholm was an all-round football great. Incredibly industrious, he was among the best passers of a ball in world football, his technique was sublime, and there have been few finer creators in the sport's history. Josef Masopust. The greatest Czech footballer of all time, Josef Masopust won the Ballon d'Or in 1962. An absolute workhorse who tended to operate as what we might now call a defensive midfielder, Masopust got up and down the pitch all match, with intercepting attacks and initiating attacks being the prime characterisations of his game. Tom Finney. A master of wing play in the immediate post-war era, Tom Finney was long considered among the top 2 or 3 wide men in Europe, and his standards rarely dropped over 15 years at the highest level. A brilliant dribbler of the ball with an explosive burst of pace, Finney was also a fairly prolific scorer from the left or right flank. Denis Law. From one British great to another, Scotland's all-time leading scorer Denis Law won the Ballon d'Or back in 1964. Such a lethal goalscorer, Law was the talisman in one of the game's all-time great attacking trios. He scored 237 goals in 404 games for Manchester United. Thierry Henry. There'll be those who feel Thierry Henry ought to be much higher in this list, and those who feel he shouldn't be in it at all, and both could make good cases for those arguments. Henry is arguably the greatest player to have graced the Premier League since it was renamed in 1992, combining lightning pace with superb technique, inventiveness, and a real eye for goal. On the other hand, his record in finals in the latter stages of both the World Cup and the Champions League leaves a little to be desired. Nevertheless, he makes our 100. Joseph Bican. Having scored 1,468 goals over the entire course of his career, Joseph Bican is ranked by the IFFHS as the greatest goalscorer of the last century. A greyhound of a striker with predatory instincts and a lethal finish, Bican could outrun Olympic sprinters, and he averaged well over a goal a game throughout his entire 27-year career. Gaetano Scirea. The Italians have long been the masters of defensive play in football, and they have produced few finer defensive players than Gaetano Scirea. A midfielder turned sweeper, and later turned centre-back, Scirea was as solid as they come defensively, but he was also extremely graceful and an excellent passer of the ball. He anchored Italy's defence when they won the World Cup in 1982. Sergio Busquets. Quite possibly the most divisive inclusion in this list, very many football fans don't appreciate the extraordinary talents of Sergio Busquets. Thankfully, managers do, particularly Pep Guardiola, who handed Busquets his debut and oversaw his transition into one of the best defensive midfielders in the world. Busquets is positionally perfect, he has a simple but brilliantly effective style, and he almost never loses the ball. He is the best pivot of the last 20 to 30 years at least, and thoroughly deserves his place in our top 100. Silvio Piola. Some strikers are seemingly born with natural goal-scoring instincts, and that certainly seemed to be the case with Silvio Piola. Piola wasn't the quickest, but he was an expert in using his body, bringing others into play, and most of all, scoring goals. He is the all-time record scorer in Italy's top flight, and he scored 5 goals for the country when they won the 1938 World Cup. Rivaldo. Leaping forward around 60 years in time, 89th place goes to Brazilian Marvel Rivaldo. Just a genius with the ball at his feet, Rivaldo had it all. He could play anywhere across the forward line, he was big, strong, he could beat players, he had magnificent vision, and he could score goals from almost any range. He should have had an even better career than the one he had, but it's still good enough for him to feature here. Elias Figueroa. Back when I put together my all-time positional series, I'd say my biggest mistake was not including Elias Figueroa in my centre-back 7. There isn't a great deal of footage of Figueroa out there, but what there is makes for impressive viewing. Physically so dominant, Figueroa was a scrupulous centre-back with excellent positional awareness and a real ability on the ball. He was FIFA's World Player of the Year in 1975 and 1976. Francisco Gento. Possibly a slightly overrated player in some quarters, I've seen Francisco Gento rank in the top 30 of some lists of this ilk, and I can't agree with that. He was an exceptional winger though, and that's why he comes 87th in our top 100. Arguably Spain's greatest footballer prior to their golden generation, Gento was a lightning left winger with frightening pace and excellent technique. He is the only player to have won the European Cup 6 times. Yui Sila. Virtually a one-club man, Yui Sila spent 19 years with his hometown club Hamburg, scoring 404 goals in 476 Bundesliga games. A short, stocky centre-forward with a bullet of a header and lethal finishing ability, he came third in the 1960 Ballon d'Or. Dixie Dean. The most prolific goalscorer in the history of the English game at his peak, Dixie Dean was one of only a few forwards in football history who could rival Yui Sila in terms of his aerial ability. The Everton legend had an unrelenting appetite for goals, and he bagged a First Division record 67 in his most prolific campaign, and a total of 395 for the Toffees in 18 from 16 caps for England. Giuseppe Bergomi. A defensive genius who was scrupulously fair and precise in his dispossession of opponents, Giuseppe Bergomi could play anywhere in defence, but he was typically deployed at right back. A one-club man, he spent 20 years with Inter Milan and won the World Cup with Italy in 1982. Ole Blokhin. The greatest Soviet footballer of them all, Ole Blokhin was an excellent dribbler of the ball with searing pace. Capable of playing through the middle or out wide, Blokhin was one of the great forwards of the 1970s, and he comfortably won the Ballon d'Or in 1975. Ruud Gullit. A wonderfully complete footballer who would have excelled in just about any position, Ruud Gullit typically played as either an attacking midfielder or as a second striker. An exceptionally hard-working, tireless, and intelligent footballer, Gullit won the Ballon d'Or in 1987, and he had to make our top 100. Leonidas. The outstanding Brazilian footballer of the pre-World War II era, Leonidas da Silva was a magnificent footballer, and he was the standout player of the 1938 World Cup, winning both the Golden Boot and the Golden Ball. Renowned for his technique, agility, and athleticism, Leonidas is often credited as having invented, or at least popularised, the bicycle kick. Dino Zoff. The oldest World Cup winner in history, having won the tournament as Italy's captain in 1982, legendary shot-stopper Dino Zoff certainly scores highly in terms of consistency at the highest level. His positioning and handling were superb, and he is rightly considered one of the greatest goalkeepers of all time. Kenny Dalglish. Considered by many to be both Liverpool and Scotland's greatest ever player, Kenny Dalglish was an all-round expert in positional play. He was a master of holding the ball up, he was intelligent, brilliant on the ball, a really creative strike partner, and a regular scorer in his own right. Karl-Heinz Rummenigge. Another brilliant second striker who any forward would love to play alongside, Karl-Heinz Rummenigge had a bit of everything. He was quick, good on the ball, a force in the air, and clinical in front of goal. Among the best players in the world in the early 1980s, Rummenigge won consecutive Ballon d'Ors in 1980 and 1981. Cafu. The finest right-back of the modern era, just ahead of Philipp Lahm in our eyes, Cafu would be a worthy addition to any team. A tireless runner with raw pace and a fantastic attitude, Cafu was a constant outlet on the right flank, whilst always maintaining absolute defensive reliability. Iker Casillas. a goalkeeper whose reputation seems to have been somewhat tarnished following his steady decline and early departure from Real Madrid, one ought not forget just how good Iker Casillas was and how early he broke into the Real Madrid team. His agility and reflexes were outstanding, and he kept guard for Spain as they won 3 consecutive major trophies between 2008 and 2012. Earned Stockwork. One of the least well-known names in this entire list, I suspect, Ernst Stockwork played in the era of attacking centre-halves, and in that category, there have been few finer players. If he played today, he'd most likely be a defensive midfielder, renowned for his classy technique, exceptional work rate, and pinpoint passes. Raymond Kopa. A quite brilliant attacking midfielder who won 3 European Cups in 3 seasons at Real Madrid, Raymond Kopa was given a free role with Los Blancos. The Frenchman was a magician with the ball at his feet, an expert technician with sharp acceleration and excellent passing ability. Omar Sivori. One of many great Argentine footballers to have represented Italy over the years, Omar Sivori is one of the finest players of his generation. Quick, skillful and unpredictable, he had brilliant technique and was a joy to watch. Sivori won the Ballon d'Or in 1961. Rivellino. We seem to be in a phase of brilliant dribblers in this top 100, and Rivellino may be the pick of the bunch so far. An attacking midfielder or wide forward with absolute mastery over the ball, Rivellino was a star of the great Brazil side that won the 1970 World Cup. Raimundo Orsi. Another Argentine-born Italian international, Raimundo Orsi was a rapid and direct wide man who scored a lot of goals. He starred for Juventus before the Second World War, where he was considered one of the finest attacking players in world football. Daniel Passarella. Argentina's leader and rock when they lifted the World Cup for the first time on home soil in 1978, Daniel Passarella was a short centre-back or sweeper with a tremendous leap. A regular goalscorer, Passarella was a determined character, defensively astute and technically gifted. Luis Figo. The best player in the world at the turn of the millennium, Luis Figo is a worthy winner of the Ballon d'Or in 2000. His last season at Barcelona was Figo at the peak of his powers. An expert technician, beating players with sheer skill, he had brilliant awareness and could cross the ball as well as anyone. But he was excellent for Sporting, Real Madrid, Inter and Portugal as well. Roy Keane. A vastly underrated footballer, we believe that is largely due to his hardman image. Keane was an uncompromising and tough character, but he was also a fantastic footballer. He was so often the driving force in a brilliant Manchester United midfield, dominating the middle of the park with his energy, dynamism, faultless passing, and footballing intelligence. Zizinho. The star of post-war Brazilian football, Zizinho took off where Leonidas had left off. A second striker or attacking midfielder who Pelé described as the best player he ever saw, Leonidas was a really complete footballer. He dropped deep to increase his impact upon a game, but scored prolifically. Zizinho won the Golden Ball as the best player at the 1950 World Cup, where Brazil was shockingly defeated by Uruguay. Socrates. Another Brazilian and another who failed to get their hands on the World Cup, Socrates was the chief orchestrator in Brazil's thrilling side in the 1982 finals in Spain. A qualified physician, Socrates was renowned for his intelligence both on and off the pitch. He had fantastic technique, great vision, and laser-like precision in the pass. Peter Schmeichel. An enormous presence between the sticks, Peter Schmeichel presented a daunting prospect for any forward hoping to score past him. Arguably the finest goalkeeper in the history of the English game, Schmeichel had excellent reflexes in addition to his impressive frame, and he seemed to cover so much of the goal with his instinctive trademark star jump save. Fritz Walter. Taken as a prisoner of war by the Soviets during World War II, Fritz Walter was spared from the gulags due to his footballing ability, but he did contract malaria during the conflicts. As a result, he could never stand the heat and he was known to play better in terrible weather conditions. Thankfully for Fritz, who captained the West Germans at the 1954 World Cup on home soil, the weather was appalling for their final against Hungary, and Walter came into his own. A really intelligent inside forward who scored prolifically, Walter was named by Germany as their best player of the last 50 years in 2003. Gunter Netzer. Nicknamed the Conductor, there have been few finer passers of a ball than Gunter Netzer in the history of the game. A genius technician and schemer, it is criminal that Netzer only won 37 caps for West Germany, but he did at least play a starring role in the nation's Euro 1972 success, and he enjoys near godlike status in his hometown of Mönchengladbach. Jimmy Greaves. The greatest centre-forward in the history of the British game, Jimmy Greaves was an absolute goal machine. He peaked young, bagging 37 goals in a single season as a teenager and 43 in a single campaign at the age of 21. A precise finisher and talented dribbler with fantastic movement and a brilliant burst of pace, Greaves retired at the age of 31, but he is still comfortably English football's all-time top-flight top scorer. Sandro Mazzola. Such a versatile footballer, Sandro Mazzola began his career as a central midfielder, but he rose to fame as an inside right under Helenio Herrera, before becoming a creative midfield playmaker later on in his career. Mazzola was fantastic on the ball and a brilliant passer, and he came second to Johan Cruyff in 1971 Ballon d'Or voting. Neil Franklin. The finest centre-half in world football at his peak, Neil Franklin was a magnificent footballer who I have just written a book about. As technically gifted as any midfielder or forward, Franklin was a master of positional play, a force to be reckoned with in the air and unflappable in possession. He was the first name on the team sheet in the strongest England 11 ever assembled in the late 1940s, but just before the 1950 World Cup, Franklin turned his back on Stoke City and England to sign a lucrative deal with Santa Fe in Colombia. Colombia proved to be a far cry from the utopia he had hoped for, unfortunately, however, and Franklin returned 2 months later to be shunned and suspended by the Football Association. My book about Franklin isn't published until August 2019, but you can read more about it at www.englandsgreatestdefender.com. Andres Iniesta. A player any football fan just has to watch and admire, Andres Iniesta has superb close control in tight situations and a real eye for a pass. He has spent much of his career on the left flank, but although he is comfortable anywhere in midfield, we like him best in the middle of the park, where he can fully exert his influence upon a game. Iniesta has finished 2nd, 3rd and 4th in Ballon d'Or voting, and he scored the only goal of the 2010 World Cup final. Juan Alberto Schiaffino. There are undoubtedly and unsurprisingly more number 10s than any other position in our top 100, and Juan Alberto Schiaffino is another attacking midfielder / second striker, although he could also play as a deep line playmaker. Schiaffino was Uruguay's star man when they won the World Cup in 1950, as well as enjoying success in Europe with AC Milan. A prolific creator of chances for his teammates, Schiaffino is a brilliant passer of the ball with quick feet and an excellent footballing brain. Gianni Rivera. I'm in danger of starting to sound like a broken record here, since many of our recent inclusions were attacking midfielders with real quality on the ball and in the pass, and Gianni Rivera is another who falls into that category. A 2-time European Cup winner at AC Milan, Rivera was such an elegant number 10, and he won the Ballon d'Or in 1969. Roberto Baggio. Considered by many to be Italy's greatest ever player, we recently named Roberto Baggio as the 7th greatest dribbler of all time. In addition to his wondrous ability with the ball at his feet, Baggio also had fantastic vision and was exceptionally prolific given that he didn't play as an out-and-out centre-forward. He won the Ballon d'Or in 1993 and was unlucky not to win it again in 1994, when he came second. Sandor Kocsis. There were a number of Hungarian players who made the 5-page shortlist for our top 100, and the first, but by no means the last, to feature is goal-scoring legend Sandor Kocsis. His record of 75 goals from 68 caps is truly exceptional, and he scored at a similar rate during his time with Budapest Honvéd and Barcelona. Kocsis was perhaps the finest attacking header of a ball in history, and that, combined with his subtle striking instincts and lethal right foot, made him one of the game's all-time great centre-forwards. Johan Neeskens. The other Johan, to put it cruelly, of the Netherlands and Ajax's great 1970s sides. Neeskens is best remembered for his fantastic work rate and iron lungs, but he could play a bit too. A neat passer of the ball with a thunderous right foot, you'd struggle to find a better box-to-box midfielder than the Dutch maestro. Jairzinho. A world-class right winger who scored in every one of Brazil's games when they won the 1970 World Cup, Jairzinho is an incredible talent. A fantastic dribbler with a slipperiness and a burst of acceleration which made him difficult to contain, Jairzinho was primarily a provider, but he scored a frightening number of goals from the flanks. Nandor Hajdguti. A player who redefined the way in which the game is played, that is just about the highest praise that you can bestow upon a sportsperson. Nandor Hajdguti wasn't football's first withdrawn forward, but he was the man who really made players and managers sit up and take note. Like a grand chess master, Hajdguti seemed to elevate himself from those around him, using his movement, technique and passing abilities to tear teams apart. He wasn't the best player in the Hungary team of the 1950s, but he was the one who made them tick and the one the teams just couldn't seem to combat. Laszlo Kubala. From no Hungarians to 3 in quick succession, there was no way Laszlo Kubala wasn't going to make our top 100. Named as the best player to have ever played for Barcelona by a fan poll in 1999, Kubala was brilliant on the ball and deadly from any range, and the huge interest in him was one of the main reasons behind Barcelona building and moving to the Camp Nou. Luis Suarez. Whilst the current Barcelona forward Luis Suarez is unfortunate to miss out on our top 100, the former Barcelona attacking midfielder by the same name marks the midway point in our list. A gem of an attacking midfielder during his time in Spain, where he won the Ballon d'Or in 1960, Suarez is most celebrated for his time at Inter Milan, where he won 2 European Cups playing as a deep-lying playmaker in the side known as Grande Inter. Carlos Alberto Torres. Known simply as the captain in Brazil, Carlos Alberto Torres is one of the game's great right-backs, and he finished off perhaps the finest goal in World Cup history in Brazil's 4-0 1970 final win over Italy. An energetic fullback with a real appetite to attack, Brazil might have had a chance of winning 4 consecutive World Cups if he had been included in their squad in 1966. Dragan Djic. Just about the perfect wide player, Pelé once said he had never seen such a natural footballer as Dragan Djic. A fantastic dribbler of the ball, renowned for his incredible ability when it came to crossing a ball and playing long-range passes, Djic spent the vast majority of his career with Red Star Belgrade, and he was the top scorer at Euro 1968, taking Yugoslavia to the final. Jacinto Facchetti. In that Euro 68 final that Dragan Djic reached, his side were finally beaten by an impressive Italian side containing the player who follows him in our top 100. Jacinto Facchetti was Europe's first world-class attack-minded left-back, and he too was a star of Helenio Herrera's Grande Inter side. Quick, tall and elegant, Facchetti would always be in contention for that left-back spot in an all-time 11. Kurt Hamrin. One of the most underrated and overlooked players when it comes to lists of this ilk, Kurt Hamrin was a genius of wing play, possessing extraordinary acceleration, fantastic close control, and an insatiable appetite for goals. Hamrin is Fiorentina's all-time leading goalscorer to this day, despite being a winger and spending less than a decade with the club. In fact, he's the 8th highest scorer of all time in the entire Serie A, ahead of the likes of Alessandro Del Piero and Gabriel Batistuta. Gordon Banks. Britain's greatest goalkeeper, Gordon Banks is the 3rd greatest player in the history of his position in our eyes. Positionally excellent, but best remembered for his extraordinary reflexes, Banks was FIFA's Goalkeeper of the Year 6 times. He won the World Cup with England in 1966, and his 1970 save against Pelé is often cited as the greatest save in the sport's history. Mario Coluna. The Portugal and Benfica teams of the 1960s are typically associated with just one man, but Mario Coluna was the driving force and the beating heart of those great sides. Although he stood at only 5 feet and 8 inches tall, Coluna always looked to be a titan in midfield, bossing games with his superior strength, energy, intelligence and technique. Nicknamed the Sacred Monster, Coluna was named in World Soccer's Best 11 in 1963, 1964, 1965 and 1966. Ruud Krol. A joyous footballer and the defensive linchpin of both Ajax and the Netherlands' total football of the 1970s, Ruud Krol could play anywhere across a backline or in midfield, but his elegant and intelligent approach was probably best suited to playing as a sweeper. Giggia. The winner of the Golden Ball when Brazil won their first World Cup in 1958, and the man credited by some with coining the phrase the beautiful game, it all could have been very different for Brazilian maestro Giggia, who almost had to have his right leg amputated at the age of 14. Thankfully he didn't, and he instead went on to become one of the most complete midfield players the game has ever seen, renowned for his gracefulness, skill, and influential free kick technique. Ronaldinho. A player who famously emulated Gigia's style of free kick almost half a century later, Ronaldinho was a difficult player to rank in this 100. His 2003 to 2006 form was probably among the top 25 peaks in the sport's history, but his relatively early demise means we rank him 41st. Ronaldinho was a delight to watch, playing with a level of freedom, skill, and audacity perhaps never seen before or since at the very highest level. He won the Ballon d'Or once and the FIFA World Player of the Year award twice. Xavi. A teammate of Ronaldinho's at Barcelona, few would have ranked Xavi as a superior footballer to Ronaldinho back in the early 2000s, but we're happy to do so now. Xavi epitomised Barcelona's style at a time when they became perhaps the finest club side in the sport's history. A puppet master on the pitch, few players have been able to control a game so proficiently thanks to Xavi's vision, pinpoint passing, and fine ball control. The greatest Spanish footballer of all time. Gianluigi Buffon. There are only 6 goalkeepers in our top 100, and in 39th place, Gianluigi Buffon is the second highest placed among them, and the third highest ranked active player in this list. Aged 40 and now playing for PSG, the former Parma shot stopper is best known for his 17-year association with Juventus and his 176 caps for Italy, which is a record for a European player. A 12-time Serie A Goalkeeper of the Year, Buffon scores extremely highly in terms of his longevity and consistency, having almost never had a poor period of form. Valentino Mazzola. We've had a number of entrants from the famed Grande Inter team of the 1960s, but in 38th place is the talisman of Italy's best team 2 decades earlier, Grande Torino. A really complete midfielder, Mazzola was a tireless runner, an excellent reader of the game, and a regular goalscorer. He captained Torino to 5 Serie A titles in 6 years, but was tragically killed along with every one of his teammates in the 1949 Superga air disaster, aged only 30. Michael Laudrup. Described by Franz Beckenbauer as the best footballer of the 1990s and by Andres Iniesta as the greatest of all time, Michael Laudrup is often, wrongly in our eyes, overlooked in lists of this ilk. Elegance personified, Laudrup was a technically brilliant and totally unselfish classical playmaker, and the likes of Romario and Raul have called him the best player they ever played with. Jaume Santos. The right-back position is the one with the fewest all-time greats in our eyes, but the position's finest exponent was Jaume Santos, and he takes 36th place in our top 100. An excellent athlete who was nicknamed The Wall, Santos was also a thoroughly competent dribbler and attacking outlet. He is one of only 3 players to make 3 World Cup All-Star teams. Gunnar Nordahl. Just about the perfect centre-forward, Gunnar Nordahl wasn't quite as dainty as some of the great number 10s in this list, but he was a strong, cunning, and deadly goalscorer. He is AC Milan's all-time leading scorer, and by some distance too, despite only spending 7 years with the club, and he scored 43 goals from 33 caps for the Swedish national team. Frank Rijkaard. So many of the game's top players were great thinkers, students of the game who could play in a variety of positions, and Frank Rijkaard falls firmly into that category. A strong and athletic defensive midfielder who influenced the totality of a game for most of his career, he was part of a strong Dutch contingent that won 2 European Cups under Arrigo Sacchi at AC Milan in 1989 and 1990. Later on in his career, he returned to Ajax, where he operated as a cool, calm, and technically brilliant sweeper or centre-back, adding a 3rd Champions League to his collection. Giuseppe Meazza. Europe's most iconic and best-known pre-war footballer, Giuseppe Meazza was a born entertainer, crowd pleaser, and ball player. He had fantastic technique and magic in his boots, scoring prolifically as a withdrawn forward for both Inter Milan and the Italian national team, winning 2 consecutive World Cups and being the best player of the 1934 edition. Bobby Moore. A confident, composed, and highly polished centre-back, described by Pelé as the greatest defender he ever faced, and by Franz Beckenbauer as the greatest defender in the history of the game, Bobby Moore lifted the World Cup as England's captain at the 1966 World Cup. Positionally excellent and sharp in the tackle, like all our favourite defenders, Moore was also very comfortable in possession and playing the ball out from the back, and he made the world team of the 20th century. Marco van Basten. Forced into an early retirement at the age of 28, virtuoso centre-forward Marco van Basten could do it all, and Fabio Capello described his premature retirement as a mortal misfortune for football. Quick, tall, technical, and a menace in the air, Van Basten's finest attribute was his clean and accurate striking of a ball, which made him an extremely prolific goalscorer. Injuries prevent him from cracking our top 30, but there have been few forwards as well-rounded as the 3-time Ballon d'Or winner. Adolfo Pedernera. The River Plate side nicknamed La Machina was almost unquestionably the finest club side assembled prior to the 1950s. Considered by some to be the most important player in that side and the great Argentina team of the same era, Adolfo Pedernera acted as a conductor, dropping off from the forward line, picking the ball up, beating players and creating chances. Idolised by Di Stefano and regarded by Obdulio Varela as his toughest ever opponent, Pedernera was a nightmare for defenders. Zinedine Zidane. You will often see Zinedine Zidane make the top 10 of these kind of lists, but he never had anywhere near the consistency or regular impact upon games to merit that. However, on his day, Zidane was something special. He was big and powerful, but so comfortable and elegant with the ball at his feet. Zizou could just glide past players, and his subtle touches and flicks were a joy to watch. A Ballon d'Or winner in 1998, Zidane reached 2 World Cup and 3 Champions League finals, winning 1 of each. Lothar Matthäus. In many respects, 28th place seems far too low for Lothar Matthäus, but that's just a consequence of the quality in our top 100. In terms of both level of ability and the amount of time spent playing at that level, Matthäus is tough to beat. A Bundesliga regular for 21 years and a German international for 20, Matthäus was a tireless runner, brilliant passer, strong tackler, and an excellent reader of the game. Maradona called him his toughest opponent, and Matthäus won both the World Cup and the Ballon d'Or in 1990. Stanley Matthews. A player who makes 20 years at the highest level look like child's play, no one can compete with Stanley Matthews when it comes to longevity. He broke into the Stoke City team at the age of 17 and didn't hang up his boots until the age of 50. Don't think Sir Stan was winding down his career in the lower leagues either, he was still a top flight player at 50. He won the Ballon d'Or at 41, he won his last cap for England at 42, and he was named as the FWA Footballer of the Year at 48. Nicknamed the Wizard of the Dribble, never has there been a finer wingmaster when it came to putting a fullback on toast and supplying a centre forward than Stanley Matthews. Gerd Muller. Every manager wants a 20-goal a season striker, and some are fortunate enough to be blessed with a 30-goal frontman. Well, during 16 seasons in German football, Gerd Muller only failed to hit the 30-goal mark twice, once bagging 67 goals in a single campaign. He didn't have the look of a classical centre-forward like Van Basten or Nadal, but he was fine-tuned for goal-scoring. He had a short, sharp burst of acceleration, a fantastic eye for the half and even quarter chances, brilliant heading ability, and above all else, he was so precise in front of goal. He fired Bayern Munich to 3 European Cups, West Germany to World Cup and European Championships glory, and won the Ballon d'Or in 1970. Nilton Santos. Into the final quarter of this list, and 25th place goes to Nilton Santos, arguably the finest and certainly the most important fullback in the history of the sport. With every passing season now, fullbacks become increasingly attack-minded, and from Roberto Carlos to Dani Alves and Kyle Walker, they owe it all to this man. A 2-footed left-back with excellent technique, Santos was nicknamed the Encyclopedia due to his understanding of the game, and he was key to Brazil's 1958 and 1962 World Cup titles. Józef Božič. Probably the least celebrated player internationally in our top 25, 24th place goes to arguably the most key component of Hungary's great golden team of the early to mid 1950s. The best way in which we can describe Božič is like Busquets and Xavi rolled into one, and that's quite some praise. A central or sometimes defensive midfielder, then known as a half-back, Božič was a really intelligent footballer, a hard worker, and an excellent passer of the ball. George Best. There were some players who were incredibly difficult to rank in this list, and then there is George Best. In the introduction, we laid out the 2 main criteria as quality and quantity. George Best scores incredibly highly for one and terribly for the other. He had 5 seasons of bewildering brilliance, 2 or 3 of being a top player, and that was about it. That's a quarter of the amount of time some of our inclusions spent at the very highest level, so 23rd is the highest we could possibly rank George Best. If it was a list of the 100 most naturally gifted footballers, he'd be in the top 10, probably the top 5. A First Division European Cup and Ballon d'Or winner at the age of 23, Best scored 32 goals in his most prolific season. He was a star, a sensation, and a flawed genius, and his career at the highest level was over at 27. Bobby Charlton. Purely by coincidence, Manchester United teammates George Best and Bobby Charlton come in next to one another in this list, although they had very different careers. Charlton spent 15 years at the highest level, winning First Division titles a decade apart, surviving the Munich air disaster, leading Manchester United in their return to greatness, and being a key man in both European Cup and World Cup glory. Such a strong runner and natural footballer, Charlton could both run a midfield and score on a regular basis. He won the Ballon d'Or in 1966. Eusebio. The greatest African-born footballer of all time, Eusebio was simply the greatest footballer of all time in the eyes of Alfredo Di Stefano. We can't go that far, clearly, since he's in 21st place, but there's no doubt that he is one of the game's great centre-forwards. A superb athlete with blistering pace and power, Eusebio had a cannon of a right foot, and he scored 473 goals in 440 games for Benfica along with 41 goals from 64 caps for Portugal, winning the Golden Boot at the 1966 World Cup and the Ballon d'Or in 1965. Matthias Schindler. When we talk about players who changed the game forever, Matthias Schindler has to be near, if not top, of that list, and his lack of recognition in much of the world is a great shame. Nicknamed the Paperman, Schindler was a precision screwdriver during an era of hammers and chisels. Football's first great withdrawn forward, Schindler was slight, intelligent, and superb on the ball. Austria's Wunder team was built around him, and he'd be our pick as Europe's finest pre-war footballer. Sadly, Schindler died under mysterious circumstances, aged 35, often thought to be linked to his opposition to fascism and the Nazi annexation of Austria. Franco Baresi. In purely defensive terms, there may well have never been a finer centre-back than Franco Baresi. Pretty short for a centre-back, Baresi was brave, composed, and positionally perfect. Strong but precise in the tackle, Baresi spent 20 years with AC Milan, 19 of which he spent as a regular first-team player. When it comes to quality and quantity, few can compete, and that's why he makes our top 20. John Charles. The finest two-position footballer in the history of the sport, what is remarkable about John Charles is that those two positions were at opposite ends of the pitch, centre-forward and centre-back. It was often joked that Leeds and Juventus would start Charles up front, let him score a goal or two, move him to centre-back and ensure a clean sheet. A footballing all-rounder, Charles oozed class both on and off the pitch, and we'd always pick him for our all-time 11 or at least our all-time squad. Paolo Maldini. The highest placed out-and-out defender in our top 100, just ahead of John Charles, if you can call the Welshman a defender, is Italy and AC Milan legend Paolo Maldini. Now, we think Maldini is the greatest left-back in football history, but above and beyond his obvious talents as a strong, stylish, and supremely intelligent defensive operator is his consistency and longevity at the very highest level. 24 years as a first-team regular at AC Milan, and almost every one of them as good as the last, gives Maldini 17th place in our list. Romario. A striker who really doesn't get the recognition that he deserves, possibly because he spent most of his career playing outside of Europe, Romario was so good that he was consistently one of the best players in the world, despite having a poor work rate and a well-documented dislike of training. A master of finding space, Romario was such an intelligent centre-forward with blistering acceleration, laser-like accuracy, and magnificent technique. He was a genius on the pitch, and he knew it, and that self-belief made him so deadly and decisive in front of goal. Zico. Whilst most Brazilian greats have a World Cup or two knocking about in their attic, or 3 in Pele's case, Zico has none, and that's perhaps why he doesn't always get the recognition that he deserves. As far as number 10s go, he was virtually perfect. He was clever, cunning, brilliant on the ball, effortlessly creative, and one of the finest free kick takers in the sport's history. There are probably only 2 players in football history who have scored and assisted on as regular a basis as Zico. Jose Manuel Moreno. Of the Argentines fortunate enough to have lived to see all 4 of the nation's greatest ever players, a number maintain that none have surpassed the talents of Jose Manuel Moreno. A dreadful trainer who lived a party lifestyle, once he crossed the white line, Moreno was a monster. The star of River Plate's great La Maquina side, Moreno was a dynamic second striker with brilliant technique, a devastating finish, and real creativity and spontaneity about his passing. Lev Yashin. The greatest goalkeeper of all time, and by some distance too, Lev Yashin is the only player in his position to crack our top 30, coming in at 13th place. Not only was Yashin a brilliant classical goalkeeper with a great presence and cat-like reflexes, he was also an innovator, implementing some of the South American goalkeeping flair of venturing out of the 6-yard box and trying to start attacks from the back, but with far greater nous. He is still the only goalkeeper to have won the Ballon d'Or. Jose Andrade. If anything, pre-war players are underrepresented in our top 100, but I have no doubt there will be hordes of people in the comments saying anything pre-1990s is irrelevant. Jose Andrade is our final pre-war inclusion and, as it follows, the man we consider to be the greatest pre-war footballer of the lot. It's easy to recognise genius in a striker, they tend to score lots of goals, and even an attacking midfielder who might make mazy runs and lay on chances for others. For a defensive midfielder though, which is what Jose Andrade was, to spend over half a decade considered as the best footballer on earth speaks volumes about how good a footballer Jose Andrade really was. The star of a Uruguayan national team which won 2 Olympic gold medals and 1 World Cup, Andrade dictated play, instigated attacks, and was outstanding on the ball. Garrincha. Football's finest out-and-out wide man, Garrincha was a flawed genius, but his demons only really started to take hold of him after his peak years. Only 9 years of top-level football prevents him from coming any higher, but his boyish attitude, extraordinary flair, and the fact he was among the greatest dribblers of all time see Garrincha almost crack our top 10. He replaced Pelé as Brazil's key man at the 1962 World Cup and quite rightly made the world team of the 20th century. Michel Platini. Down to the serious business of the top 10, we're now talking about players who were regular match winners, decisive performers, technically world class, and spent a number of years at the highest level. Michel Platini actually retired relatively young, just before his 34th birthday, but for more than a decade, he was one of the best footballers on the planet. A 3-time Ballon d'Or winner, Platini was an incredibly prolific scorer and creator of goals from attacking midfield, brilliant on the ball, deadly from set pieces, and a master in the pass. Ferenc Puskás. There are a few things you ought to know about Ferenc Puskás, and those of you who already know them, there's no harm in being reminded. The Hungarian great scored a total of 622 goals in 629 games, which I'm sure you'd agree is impressive enough on its own. But when you factor in that he achieved those numbers despite losing probably the 2 best years of peak ability through UEFA suspension, it's clear that we're talking about a rare talent. Physically, Puskás didn't appear to be a world-class athlete, but he played the game in his head, bewildering defenders and beating goalkeepers with what is possibly the most precise left foot of all time. Remarkably, Puskás never won the Ballon d'Or. Franz Beckenbauer. If you call Franz Beckenbauer a defender, then there can be no doubt that he is the greatest defender of all time. The reason for the confusion is the fact that the man the Germans called their Kaiser began his career in central midfield before becoming the most iconic, distinguished, and talented sweeper the game has ever seen. A really brave, hard-working, and inspirational leader who was also a magnificent reader of the game with fantastic technique and an eye for a pass, Beckenbauer was the best of both worlds. Despite playing so deep, he is one of the game's greatest playmakers, and he won every trophy on offer with both club and country over a sensational 20-year career, as well as a couple of Ballon d'Ors on his own. Ronaldo. The only one of our top 10 who lacks a certain degree of longevity is Ronaldo Luis Nazario de Lima. The best teenage footballer of the last 30 years at least, Ronaldo set world record fees twice before his 21st birthday. It was at this stage in his career that Ronaldo threatened to become the greatest player in the sport's history. Remarkably quick, he had tremendous feet and total control even when running at pace, combined with power, flair, and a huge number of goals. Sadly, however, Ronaldo played just 24 games in 3 seasons after a couple of awful injuries, which prevents him from troubling our genuine GOAT candidates. But a remarkable footballer nevertheless. Johan Cruyff. The most influential figure in the last half-century of football and maybe more, Johan Cruyff was the catalyst and key exponent in the total football of both Ajax and the Netherlands under Rinus Michels. A natural footballer and a world-class technician, although Cruyff was a fantastic dribbler of the ball, it was his intelligence and tactical understanding of the game which has enshrined him in footballing folklore. A 3-time Ballon d'Or winner, Cruyff was one of the best players in the world at 18 and arguably still one of the best players in the world at 37, and he's the first inclusion in our very solid top 6. Cristiano Ronaldo. I have been accused of being biased against and in favour of Cristiano Ronaldo, the same way you're biased in favour and against every club if you try to run a football YouTube channel. There will be those who say Cristiano Ronaldo should top this list, and others who claim he shouldn't even be in the top 10. We'll start with addressing why he is so high. Well, to put it simply, it's because Ronaldo is one of the greatest footballers to have ever lived. In his relentless pursuit of goals, greatness, and worldwide acclaim, he has reached truly extraordinary heights. From his all-encompassing physical and technical excellence on the left wing for Manchester United, to his pure goal-scoring instincts and nous at Juventus now, Ronaldo's consistency and effectiveness is almost without peer. As for why he isn't top, or indeed higher than 5th, that is because of Ronaldo's game outside of goal scoring. In a game which Ronaldo doesn't score, it's often the case that he hasn't contributed a great deal to his team. The 4 players ahead of him could all readily be stripped of their goal scoring exploits and they would still rank as all-time greats. That's the difference. Alfredo Di Stefano. It's difficult to surmise just how good Alfredo Di Stefano was. The most complete footballer ever, bar none, Di Stefano was a man who routinely dropped so deep that he would pick the ball up off his centre half. and yet his goal-scoring record suggests he was as much of a pure goal-scorer as Ronaldo, having bagged 497 goals in 669 games over the course of his career. Di Stefano played the game in a bubble, never hurried or flustered by pressure, effortless on the ball, decisive in the final third, and a constant source of creativity. His first touch and footballing intelligence was second to none, and if you could pick one man to build a team around in the history of the sport, there would be no finer candidate than Alfredo Di Stefano. Diego Maradona. In terms of seemingly God-given talent and natural individual genius with a ball at their feet, we'd be quite happy to call Maradona the greatest of all time. Sadly, El Diego is not without his troubles, and his troubles with addiction and subsequent use of performance-enhancing drugs do put a stain on an otherwise incredible career. With both Napoli and Argentina, Maradona wasn't always surrounded by stars, but he was enough of a star on his own to compensate. Unstoppable in full flow, the ball was glued to his left foot. He had explosive pace and power, and his on-field decision-making was so often on point. On his day, the greatest of all time. Over the course of his career, he takes bronze. Pele. I'm not going to dwell on Pele for too long, because we have previously talked about him a great deal, most notably in our 7 reasons why calling Pele a fraud is ridiculous video. So feel free to give that a watch if you're new to the channel and thirsty for more information about the greatest footballer of the 20th century. At 17, Pele was arguably already the best footballer on the planet. He maintained that reputation for at least the next 12 years, despite missing the majority of 2 World Cups through injury, including the one which came at his peak in 1962. Pele had everything. He was blessed with wonderful technique, he was a menace in the air, and he went cold in front of goal. Pele was so far ahead of his time, and a really good case can be made for him being the greatest player of them all. The honourable mentions. Right, this is a bit ridiculous, since a genuine list of honourable mentions here would last for an hour or so. Nevertheless, there are some players I'm just going to very quickly rattle off because it would seem rude not to, and partly for diplomatic reasons too. They include Paul Breitner, Oliver Kahn, Lilian Thuram, Philipp Lahm, Roberto Carlos, Patrick Vieira, Paul Scholes, John Terry, Steven Gerrard, Frank Lampard, Zoltan Skibor, Paolo Rossi, Kevin Keegan, Dennis Bergkamp, Florian Albert, Jimmy Johnston, Gigi Riva, Just Fontaine, Hristo Stoichkov, Javier Zanetti, Ryan Giggs, Hugo Sanchez, Mario Kempes, Neymar, Luis Suarez, Obdulio Varela, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, Sepp Maier, Georgi Hagi, Gerson, Bertie Vogts, Pavel Nedved, Falcao, Ian Robin, Jose Santamaria, Arsenio Arico, Fernando Redondo, Alessandro Nesta, Hector Real, Nesta Rossi, and Rach Carter. And breathe. Right, that's it for our top 99 and honourable mentions. I'm not sure there's too much tension here unless you've had rather a large brain fart, but a drum roll nonetheless. Thank you to those of you for watching, we've no doubt you strongly disagree. We'd love to hear your views in the comments, and if you're watching this as a premiere, I believe we've even enabled something called a super chat, which I'm not sure what that means, but apparently you can make sure that we can see your comment. Anyhow, top spot goes to Lionel Messi. Yes, to the eternal shock of absolutely nobody, top spot goes to Lionel Messi. I have to say, it took some time for me to be convinced that Messi was the greatest of all time, but we think it's a position which is hard to argue against now. As with Pele, we won't rattle on about the little Argentine for too long because we already have a video entitled 7 Reasons Why Lionel Messi is the GOAT, where we go into far more detail and cover all the classic Messi FAQs far more comprehensively than we ever could here. Dribbling, passing, finishing, these are the attributes that make a world-class forward player, and Messi ranks among the finest of all time in every criteria, and he's the only player that you could say that of. On top of his mind-boggling technique though, Messi's decision-making is possibly his most impressive attribute. He so rarely makes a poor decision, and he so often sees either an opening to exploit himself or to play a ball through that no other player could see even sat in the stands. We should consider ourselves incredibly fortunate to be living during the era of Lionel Messi, and I would be absolutely unsurprised if I never saw a better player in all my days revolving around the sun on this pale blue dot. So that's it for our Not Actually a 7. Thanks for watching, give us a like if you enjoyed the video, and don't forget to subscribe to HITC 7s. You can also follow us on Twitter at HITC 7s.